Hi, everyone. Happy Friday Eve. Tomorrow is Friday the 13th, which is wild. So I'm hoping that you're doing something fun. But you are in the space of building thinking classrooms in a self-paced learning environment. So welcome, welcome, welcome. We are so excited to be here in this space with you to talk about how this could look in your classrooms, in your learning environments. And then, of course, this webinar is brought to you by Modern Classrooms, and I'm not going to talk about it. We're just going to play this quick video so that you can learn a little bit more about this organization.
Tell me if this has happened to you. You come to school one day, the teacher's at the board, and it's time for the lesson. Except you were homesick yesterday. So when the teacher starts talking, you're not sure what they're talking about. You're lost. Or maybe you learned this last year. So when the teacher explains what you already know, you're bored. Or maybe you're just having a bad day. It happens. The teacher's talking, but you can't focus. You're distracted. And meanwhile, the teacher's not sure what to do. The teacher is stressed. But what if your teacher steps down from the front of the room? If you are sick, you don't have to worry. Your teacher's lessons are on video, so you can pick up right where you left off. This isn't from YouTube, by the way. Your teacher made the video, and you're watching them explain. So you're not lost anymore. You're engaged. And if you already know the content, you can move ahead and do an extension activity. You can work on this with your classmates. Now you aren't bored anymore. You're challenged. And if you're having a bad day, the teacher has time to sit with you. They can ask what's wrong and help you feel better. You aren't distracted anymore. You feel supported. And by the way, your teacher realizes that they can meet your needs. And they can feel successful. We call this a modern classroom. Welcome! In a modern classroom, you'll notice 3 new things. First, your teacher is creating videos for you. You can watch these videos in class or at home. You can pause, rewind, rewatch, or skip ahead if you get it. These don't replace your teacher, they just clone your teacher so that they can support you individually. Next, you'll learn at your own pace. When you get things quickly, you move ahead quickly. When you need more time, you'll have the time you need. This means you'll learn as much as you can without being rushed or held back. Finally, you're really going to learn things. In fact, you'll master them. You won't move to lesson 2 until you really understand lesson 1. So when you learn something new, you're really going to learn it. After all, you're too capable for anything less than true understanding. So that's a modern classroom for you. Now what are you waiting for? Let's learn!
Beautiful. Again, welcome, welcome. And hopefully that gave you some insight of what Modern Classroom does for our learners and our educators as well. And so for our next slide, yep, there we go. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and pass this on to Joe. But before I do that, I'm going to go ahead and quickly introduce myself. So, Joe, you can skip the next slide as well. So we can just kind of go with the flow as well. And so, y'all, I am a designated hype person for Modern Classrooms Project. I'm a former educator of 10 years, instructional coach after, and now I get to celebrate, empower, and support educators all over the world. And so this is just such a dope experience for me to be able to share stories, to be able to elevate stories as well, and to find educators like Joe, who's so knowledgeable about all the things. Literally, whenever I'm in a space with Joe, my brain expands. And mind you, he teaches math and I taught English. So math ain't mathing for me. But Joe does a really great job of breaking down how to teach math, what math education could and should look like. And so I'm just really excited to pass this on to you, Joe, and continue learning from you.
Oh, Tony Rose, you're so kind. You are the designated hype person. Anytime I'm in a space with you, I always leave the space happier than when I entered it. I am a 7th grade math teacher. I enjoy talking about things that I do in my class. I enjoy researching on best practices, being able to incorporate collaborative learning environments with self-paced learning environments. And I'm here just to share one piece of my practice. I think a lot of people are now implementing self-paced learning environments, and it's good to see how we can incorporate kind of the best of both worlds, right? Collaboration and self-paced learning. So I'm hoping as a result of this that we grow in our practice as well, whether on the macro lens of thinking about mindset, or even just some of the strategies that are shared in this presentation as well. And you can reach out to me or Tony Rose as well once this presentation is over. But I would love to just get right into it. This webinar is Building Thinking Classrooms in a Self-Paced Learning Environment. That's interweaving independent and collaborative learning for optimal breadth and depth of learning. When we're looking at what we're going to be learning today, we'll have some welcome introductions, which we kind of just did. We'll hit the desired outcomes, and then we'll talk about the progressions of self-paced learning. Then we'll get into building thinking classrooms, both the why and the how. And we'll finish by kind of putting all of this together, balancing independent and collaborative learning, putting it all together into practice, and we'll address questions and next steps based on how much time we have. So first, also we're going to be looking at a couple resources. So the resources that we'll be looking at are Tech with Heart, Stacy Roshan. She was one of the pioneers when it came to providing flipped instruction. She was actually doing it before the terminology flipped instruction was a thing. The end of average, we'll look at Todd Rose's story of how we can look at there's no such thing as average. It's all about individualism and how we can really cater to that in education. Of course, this webinar will have Building Thinking Classrooms in Math by Peter Liljedahl, that bestseller in mathematics education for countless years now. We have Visible Learning for Mathematics. I know some people are for John Hattie, some people are not, but the meta-analysis does bring to light a lot of best practices that work when it comes to tier 1, tier 2 instruction. And Geoff Krall's Necessary Conditions, so like those 3 pillars for secondary math teaching, that is academic safety, quality tasks, effective facilitation. And going back to our desired outcomes, we're going to really just know why, how, and when we, participants, can embed building thinking classrooms, collaborative learning, in a self-paced learning environment. And we're going to start with the end of average. So feel free to reply in the chat if you've already read The End of Average by Todd Rose. If you haven't, I highly recommend it. There's a lot of just real life stories that he brings to light. And the one that he introduces the book with is the airplane story. And for those of us that are not familiar with the airplane story, it was the US had challenges in the 1940s with planes that were crashing due to pilot error. It's not that the planes didn't have the flaws in how they were built, but there was nothing mechanically that was wrong with them, but they would be crashing, and they didn't understand what was wrong. They attributed it to pilot error, and they hired somebody to come in, some consultant to come in and actually understand like what's happening with these planes. Why is it going wrong? And the person looked at the specifications of the cockpit. There was 10 specifications that were built off of the average pilot, the average arm length, the average torso length, the average leg length. And what this person did, this is a consultant, they said, oh, let me look at each individual pilot in comparison to the average. And what that person found was when measuring each pilot to that quote unquote average, only 7 out of the 10 specs were addressed. With all of the pilots, the highest number would be 7 out of 10. So even when you looked at all of these pilots that were supposedly within that range of the average, only 10 of the specifications were met in actually fitting within the average size of the cockpit. He came to the conclusion there is no such thing as an average. So he went back to the engineers and he said, hey, I need you to figure out how to fix this cockpit so you can actually customize it around the size of the pilot itself. And because of this person, we now today have adjustable seats in cars. Think about that. When you get into a car, you can take a seat, you can move your seat forward and back, up and down, you can position your steering wheel at the right height, because we know that those things matter, that the appropriate distance matters from our foot to the foot pedal and so forth. And And all of that started the idea of it's not about us trying to fit the individual within the system, but us trying to fit the system around the individual. So we know that one size does not fit all. But there's a challenge with education. And in the past, I mean, like pre-internet, the only way for students to be able to learn and receive a learning experience was from coming into the class, sitting down, listening and copying from the teacher at the board, because if they did not pay attention and listen and write down the things that the teacher provided, they were not going to get learning anywhere else. And then the internet happened. And when the internet happened, we realized we can learn from anywhere. YouTube, right? So people were able to post up videos on YouTube. There was learning opportunities on YouTube. We were able to learn from content on YouTube. This was on demand with the capability for educational content. Though we know YouTube is not just used for educational content. We know that there's entertainment involved. And there was a brilliant person that came up with Khan Academy. So Khan Academy was this platform where we said, hey, let's use the internet and create an entire platform where we can only access educational content. And people saw the value in this, right? We're engaging with instructional videos that we can slow down, we can speed up, we can change the pace to meet our needs. Maybe we can even try some stuff and then go back to the video. The challenge here, though, was when teachers tried to implement it with their practice. They saw that, oh, some stranger is making this instructional video, and how I deliver content is slightly different than how this person in the video does. So what teachers did, so yeah, we saw that content was created by mostly strangers. So that is what really introduced us to the flipped classroom model. That was our early 2010s was when the flipped classroom model really made waves because it was the idea that, oh, I can just recreate myself through an instructional video, and the kids can do things at home, and they come into class, and then they talk about what they did independently. It's beautiful. It's the best of all worlds. But there was a challenge to this. When we think about the early 2010s, there was an access problem that there was this inequity of digital literacy and access outside of the classroom. Not all students had technology at home. Not all students had enough digital literacy to be able to engage with technology, typing, accessing the internet, email. Email wasn't really a big thing at that time. So this was the big challenge that we were dealing with, that one could actually argue we created a greater inequity as a result of the flipped classroom, because the students that were able to learn from it were the ones that had the privilege of technology and the privilege of digital literacy. So what did we do to take care of this? What did we do to address this? And that's where the Modern Classrooms Project came in, where we said, hey, this is still really a good thing for students to be able to learn from instructional videos, for the teacher to be able to make the videos, but why do they only have to do it at home? Why can't they do it in the class? And then how do we create an instructional model around this? And that was the 3 pillars. So Kareem Farah, he's actually formerly an educator in Hawaii. He created this instructional model. It came out. This is right here. I heard about it in May. This is May 2019. Yeah, I heard about it. This was pre-pandemic, and they introduced these 3 pillars: the blended instruction, where students can access the content through the teacher-created videos; these self-paced structures, where it doesn't matter if a student is struggling, they can spend a little bit more longer time on a lesson, or if a student is really grasping things, they can move along quicker. And lastly, mastery-based learning. So just making sure that a student fully understands what they're learning before they move on to the next thing, especially if learning is sequential, as some of the standards are built in mathematics. So what made this kind of pushed to the front? What made this now something that is practical for everyone? COVID-19. In COVID, we had teachers, students, and schools. Teachers needed to teach with technology. That was the only way that students were going to be accessing learning. Students needed to learn with technology, and schools needed to create access to teaching and learning with the use of technology. It has been the exponential growth of digital literacy across generations, not just for Gen Alpha, not just for Gen Z, but all the way up to even the boomers. Everybody has improved their digital literacy and tech skills because we needed to use it in order to connect with each other, in order to learn. And that's the beauty of it. So when we look now at how many classrooms are creating these self-paced learning environments, where they're creating these asynchronous tools for students to learn, whether they're in the classroom or not, that's what's really wonderful. And we see the benefits. We see that students don't need to engage in busy work, that they can move on to the next part of their learning journey. They can also work at the pace that best suits their needs for learning. And then again, I'm going back to Stacy Roshan with Tech with Heart. She was so aware of when you free up this time where students are learning from these asynchronous materials and having independent learning time, that you can build personal connections and personalized learning, that you can meet with students, talk to students about how they're doing, and you could talk to students about how their work is. And from this, when students are doing their individual processing, outside of class time, when you're freeing up lecture, you now have time for formative instruction, where you're providing instruction based on what students are doing and saying. You're not talking to an audience and just having them listen, and you don't know exactly where they are, but they're going to take down notes no matter what. You don't know if a kid has watched a YouTube video about what you're already delivering in class. When you're providing formative instruction, you're teaching in response to what students say and do. You're meeting them where they're at. And that's the beauty of it. But there are flaws. And when I talk about flaws, there's a downside to unintentional self-paced learning. That is, we can have tech fatigue. I mean, I think we're all aware now of the 20-20-20 rule, right? So every 20 minutes, you should be looking 20 feet away for 20 seconds. I probably should remind us during this webinar to do that. Tony Rose, I don't know, maybe you can, we'll see. Also, there's the downside of addiction. We have some people that are addicted to technology. We need to detox away from technology. If students are working too far ahead, there can be this narrow view of content where because they are ahead in the curriculum, nobody else is working at the same thing that they're working at, and then therefore they lack the ability to develop conceptual understanding through discourse. They can only see it their way as opposed to other ways. And I'm going to pull up my notes because I have to quote some people on this. But in visible learning and necessary conditions. So visible learning, Hattie wrote this specifically. He said on page 62, students, like the rest of us, are social creatures who learn and remember best when they're interacting with others. He also wrote on page 225, even for advanced students, there are students who can consistently find the correct answer, but may struggle to explain why their answer is correct because, quote unquote, they just know it. Geoff Krall wrote, kids who had been accelerating in the past had deficiencies when it came to, say, explaining their work or communicating their ideas or collaborating with others. We had this yearning after the pandemic for the ability to connect and learn with each other. We saw that school is not just an avenue for delivering content. We saw that it's a means for creating culture, creating this space of belonging. As you can see now, like belonging is a huge theme in education, mainly because we saw the downside of unintentional self-paced with too much emphasis on technology. So what we learned was that collaboration cannot happen accidentally. We can't stumble upon collaboration. We can't say, hey, here is time for collaboration. If kids wanted to collaborate, they could. We needed to be intentional about it. And that's really what brought to the forefront building thinking classrooms. Because it's not the only collaborative strategy, but it has made waves. It is the bestseller in mathematics education now for a while. So why? Well, first, it is intentionally collaborative. When kids come into the class, they are working at vertical non-permanent surfaces and collaborating together. Yeah, there is a short part where the teacher is providing verbal instructions, but right after the less than 5 minutes of verbal instructions, students are collaborating with each other. It requires no technology, which is in some spaces, those are needed. Kids want to get away from technology. Parents might want their children to be getting away from technology, and this creates that space. And it's not a typical learning environment. He's very adamant. Peter is very adamant on the classroom being defronted, where there's no front of the room. When they come into class, they know that they're going to be standing. They're not going to be sitting. And when the teacher provides that guidance of the thinking task, he also is clear that students should not be able to work without being given that task verbally. Therefore, it's contextually unique in that you have to be there in order to be able to do the work that you're supposed to be doing in this environment. And that's what creates experiences and connections. It's not a communication deliver and receive, but it's an experience around learning. And that's why it is a bestseller. That is why I can only imagine. If you want, feel free to write in the chat if you're implementing it or if you're reading the book right now. Some people might be in just that first toolkit. Some people might have already read it and they're implementing it and they're curious about this in self-paced learning environment. Feel free to write in the chat just where you are in engaging with Liljedahl's building thinking classrooms. So what is it? Well, I'm only going to address the first toolkit, but I'm going to show the big picture first. The big picture here is 14 practices. When applied, they create a thinking classroom. And he's very insightful here when he talks about 4 toolkits, because we know that fidelity, like the top tier implementation of this, is not going to happen on day one. That it requires a scaffolding and there's a progression. So he scaffolds this with 4 toolkits, the phases to roll out implementation of building thinking classrooms. And that it's made up of learning environment, pedagogy, as well as curriculum enhancements. So 14 practices. I took this picture. This is from Laura Wheeler. Some of us might be zooming in right now to look at it. You can understand that each toolkit, each of the 4 toolkits, is actually a row here. And the first one, he talks about building. You begin with a problem. You have visibly random groups, vertical non-permanent surfaces, and then there's this pedagogy. Like, how do you manage that environment? Oral instructions, defronting the room, answering questions, students taking meaningful notes, building that autonomy where they're not dependent on the teacher. And it gets further with talking about how do we even assess. And then from the assessment, how do you report grades? It's an entire system. It's well beyond the stuff that I'm going to be talking about now. I'm not going to be able to talk about the entire thing because building thinking classrooms, it's almost 300 pages. It took me over a year to read and internalize myself. And I wouldn't be doing it justice if I had everybody be able to understand it completely in an hour-long webinar. So we're going to dive into 4 toolkits here, but we're only going to dive into this first toolkit in the top right corner, where it is giving thinking tasks, frequently forming visible random groups, and using vertical non-permanent surfaces. So in that toolkit, the first one there is giving thinking tasks. He talks about at the beginning of the school year, you don't even want to start with curricular tasks because that might not be engaging for students. You want to start with non-curricular tasks. Fun problem-solving tasks that require students to engage with each other. Everybody, if you've implemented building thinking classrooms, I'm sure you've talked about and or done the tax collector yourself. It's really a wonderful one where kids kind of see the value of engaging with complex, non-linear problem-solving stuff that it's not like, oh, if I do A, then I get B. It's trial and error. It's trying different things to be able to develop reasoning, build up a pattern, build up a relationship, and determine how to build upon that. The other thing is how he talks about scripting your curricular tasks by asking questions that build upon prior knowledge. And that leads to that logic of thin slicing. So what he wants us to be able to do with our students is for them to be able to latch on and build upon their prior knowledge into new learning. So finding ways to thinly slice problems where students can apply their prior knowledge to be able to solve a problem that they already know how to do, but then you slightly increase the rigor of the problem, the scaffolding of the problem, where you don't verbally do anything as the teacher, but the task itself, as they go and complete tasks, there's another task that is slightly more difficult and slightly introduces the complexity of the standard that you are addressing. The other thing later on in the book that he references is labeling of problems, and he is so right when students, given the option of choosing easy, medium, or hard tasks, or mild, medium, and spicy, 10 times out of 10, they would rather the label be mild, medium, and spicy. Students like that. If you're listening and this is the first time you've heard of building thinking classrooms, like, just that's one tiny tip that you have right there that you could just apply for labeling tasks. Instead of saying, hey, this is easy, this is medium, this is hard, you call it mild, medium, and spicy. Students love that. So from the tasks, then he talks about frequently forming visibly random groups. What does that mean? Students need to know when they come into the classroom that they are randomly placed. It's not that you have randomly placed it on your own and then you're saying, hey, this is where you're going in. No, he likes the students to actually know that you did not intentionally put them with this student with this student. A popular way he recommends is to use a card deck, hand out a random card to a student, and based on the card that they receive is the board that they go to be able to work with whoever they're supposed to be working with. Something to make students know that the groups are intentionally random, that you did not put this person with this person. And going down the list here, again, this is Laura Wheeler's sketch notes, forming visibly random groups. You can introduce at any time, that students become agreeable. And this big one right here, right in the middle, is eliminating social barriers. That students who might not work with each other if you did not unintentionally put these two students together. Like that's the idea in this environment, that you're breaking down those barriers. You're allowing space for that mobility of knowledge. He has arrows on the bottom here that it's your students are relying less on answers from the teachers. They're relying within each other for those answers. They're increasing engagement, and the enthusiasm is increased. Think about it yourself. Like when you go into a meeting or a workshop, you can sit next to the people that you sit with every single day. Or imagine if you're going in and you don't know who you're going to be working with. Actually, I don't know if that's a good thing or bad thing, but the unpredictability there makes it more exciting for students when they come in. And lastly, it's how they're working. They're working on vertical non-permanent surfaces. This is the third bullet there. Vertical non-permanent surfaces, I use upright whiteboards. He says you could use chalkboards or windows, but in reality, you want to have some sort of a surface that makes it clear to see, but it's also easily erasable. Because when it's easily erasable, then students can put ideas up faster and they can iterate faster. They can erase their work faster. On the bottom here, they talk about the non-linearity of work, that you're creating this mobility of knowledge, because when these problems are put up on the boards, students are not just looking at their own problem, they're able to see how another group is doing it. Me, myself, as the teacher, I'm formatively assessing what students are doing, and I'm listening to the conversations, and I'm determining what are my next steps through the formative instruction model. And that's the beauty of just this first toolkit. He talks about give a thinking task, form visibly random groups, and have them work at upright whiteboards, not vertically non-permanent surfaces. There's another part in a future toolkit that I do want to mention as well. My lights are going off in the background. I'm going to turn my lights back on. Awesome. Flow from the Hungarian researcher mentioned on the bottom here. This is how we want to be managing student learning through the environment. We want to provide enough rigor to where kids are not bored, right? We don't want to have the tests be too easy. That's what leads to boredom, or the ways they're interacting with each other. Same thing, though, we also don't want to provide too much to where we have frustration, right? So frustration and boredom are the areas that are not within that zone of proximal development. That flow falls in that line where kids are not bored, not frustrated, but they can develop patience. They can develop perseverance. And that's through your job as the teacher to manage it through the tasks that you provide and the support that you provide as the groups are engaging with each other. Because we know the rigor is not only going to come from the tasks you give, but also the people that students have to work with. Because if everybody's at the same level, nobody has to ask the question why. If there's a wide range of learners, then you're going to have a lot more engaging and productive discourse that you'll have to coach students through to be able to both have perseverance and patience in that problem solving. But that's not the only thing. A lot of people think, okay, we can just apply building thinking classrooms. What's the point of even having these self-paced structures then if we can just do this entire system of building thinking classrooms? Well, I want to address what he writes on page 163 about preloading. He says this. He says, if there is a student operating well behind the rest of the class, then working with that student in the period before to prepare them for the coming task is helpful in making them a relevant member of the group. We call this preloading. So what he's talking about is when a student might come to class and just play on the role of passive recipient. They might just join their group and like write down what the group, like copy and listen to the rest of the group, but not necessarily producing. So what he wants to do is preload them with information so they can contribute in class. One thing we know from the Universal Design for Learning is if you're going to provide a support for one student, you should make that accessible for all learners. The other thing is what Hattie talks about in visible learning with independent exploration and productive struggle prior to group work. And that is, he wrote this on page 165. He said, we have seen teachers get better results by giving their students time to wrestle with the task individually before engaging with their teammates. The same logic is applied here. What we want students to be able to do is before they engage in collaboration, is that they're coming back and forming independent critical thought. They're forming their own conception that they can bring into a collaborative environment and thus be a productive member of that collaborative environment. So that's right here. Preload, we want to preload instruction and independent tasks to support the development of critical thought. And that's where this balance comes in of independent and collaborative learning. When we're talking about trying to create this balance, we want to provide enough independent learning for the students to build their own conception and critical thinking. But if we provide too much independent learning, that will lead to decreased social emotional learning, interpersonal skills, and that more narrow view of content. Now going to collaboration, we want to provide enough collaborative learning to broaden perspectives and build our social emotional and interpersonal skills. But too much collaborative learning will create individuals who lack critical thought and or are dependent learners. That's the point here. We want to have critical thinking, and we also want to have broadened perspectives and greater interpersonal skills. We want the best of both worlds, but there is a detriment to being too much imbalanced on either part. So now we're going to put it all together. We're going to talk about how. We're going to look at what does it look like in practice. Well, here it is. I'm going to be very clear. I don't do building thinking classrooms. I don't do a thinking classrooms routine every single day. It'll be every other day, or at least every 3 days. We'll do one at the beginning of class. But here is just my daily agenda outline for when we do a thinking classrooms routine. The first 35 minutes of class, I'll be giving that thinking task. I'll manage the flow. I'll consolidate that collaborative learning experience. And I know some people have different class time lengths, so you just want to consider balancing collaborative and independent work around 50-50. Hattie recommends at least 50% of class time being collaboration. And I'm having some people that are already calculating and going, wait, if it's 80 minutes and 35 minutes is thinking classrooms routine, that is less than half. What is Joe talking about? In this self-paced structure, students do have the option to be able to collaborate with each other around these tasks. They don't have to solely do it alone and independently. So understanding that they might choose to do that, I'll have this 35 minutes of guaranteed intentional collaboration, but I don't know if students may or may not, and they all collaborate to different extents. Some students like to spend a majority of time collaborating, whereas other students might want to only collaborate based on a need. They want to hear from this person. They want to hear that person's perspective. And it's all their choice. So you want to think about 50-50 here for the ratio of time collaborating versus independent self-paced learning time. Student choice. Student choice can be from the instructional videos, the individual or collaborative work, taking mastery checks, reflecting in their progress trackers. The first 20 minutes here, I don't know if you can see my cursor, but the first 20 minutes talks about student choice where I'm available for intervention and support. If students are struggling as they're in the middle of their learning journey, they're watching a video and they're pausing the video and they have questions for me, I'm going to make myself available during those first 20 minutes. And then the last 20 minutes of class is more of me at my desk having conversations with students while evaluating their mastery checks. I'm having one-to-one conversations with each student at least every other class. I know exactly where they're at. I'm responding to their specific conceptions. This is how we personalize the learning experience. I'm not talking in theory. It is as practical as it can be, and we're doing feedback right, where it's direct and immediate based on the work that they do. Moving on to the next slide. What are they doing in the Thinking Classrooms routine? Well, first, I'm giving the thinking task, I'm managing the flow, I'm helping consolidate that collaborative learning experience, and we're doing quote unquote on-pace thinking tasks and thin slicing. What do I mean by on pace? Well, here is just a topic banner that I give for each unit. So this was last year. Topic 3, as you can see, there are 6 lessons, 3-1, 3-2, 3-3, 4, 5, 6. And then I have this guided pace where, because students can access content independently and move faster through lessons, or move slower if they see that they're stuck on something, I'm going to have students at different lessons within the same unit. So what I provide is this guidance of a guided pace that is leading to that summative assessment at the end of the unit. So they know typically on this first day that we're going to be on 3-1. And on the second day, maybe if it's a big lesson, it might be even the third day, second and third day, we're going to be on 3-2. And 3-3 might be the fourth day. So on this guided pace, those are where I will be providing that thinking task, and I will thin slice from those thinking tasks. Now, as we think about thin slicing from thinking tasks on pace, understanding that kids are going to be on different lessons, they're going to be bringing variable amounts of understanding in collaborating in this self-paced environment. You're going to have some students who have already done the lesson before independently, and you're going to have some students who haven't seen it yet. And that's the beauty of it. That's what we want when we're working around thinking tasks. When students know that there is a variable amount of understanding, there's value in collaborating and learning from and with each other. Peter Liljedahl, he has structures. He talks about these modes of engagement that increase in rigor, from doing to justifying to explaining to teaching to creating. So we can see how we can provide opportunities for students and say, like, hey, it's not just about getting things done. Getting things done is the lowest on his scale. I actually created my own 3 tiers of understanding. This is what I use. And I thought it was something that was only in my class until Dr. Pim Seda used it in her framework for choosing to see, a framework for equity in the math classroom. She uses it in her bullet for excellence. And I talk about how doing a problem is actually the lowest level of understanding. To explain what you did, why you did, how it works, that's a little bit higher. And then to empathetically explain an alternative conception than your own, that's even more of an elevated understanding. The beauty of empathetic explanation being the highest level of understanding here is that one needs to know that it's not about being able to explain your own way, but to be able to explain somebody else's way. And that requires listening. So when we have groups working together, I'll look at some students that have already completed the lesson, and they're working with somebody else who hasn't been on that lesson independently. You'll hear them actually asking questions to the person who doesn't understand yet, so they can broaden their perspective. It's our students that are accelerated, the advanced students are the ones that are curious, and the ones that are struggling are the ones that are actually producing more. We're creating this environment where there's equity of voice, where our struggling learners are not the ones that are only serving as passive recipients, but they're the ones that are actually active producers in the environment. So you want to think, when you have those mixed level of learners working together, how are you providing supports for them to interact and engage with each other? These are just 2 ways here with the modes of engagement and the 3 tiers of understanding. we're going to come now to, we're going to take a step back and just kind of look at everything that was delivered. I talked fast. I said a lot. I'm pretty sure this is recorded, and that's the beauty of this, because you can now go back to this. You can watch the video. You can talk you can see where I was talking fast, and you could pause. You could slow it down. Watch at your own pace. I have some thumbs up right there. I know I went fast during some parts, but we're gonna try to consolidate here. Main takeaways. We're gonna start class with collaborative learning, thinking tests. You don't want to let collaboration happen accidentally. You need to be intentional about it. And the best way to be intentional about it is to start class with it. Next, you're going to consider the variable amounts of understandings that students will bring to the group. You can't just assume they all understand the same thing, and you need to be intentional about that task and how they go about working together to manage flow. Next, you want to think about balancing collaboration and self-pacing to ensure the benefits of each. You want critical thought, but also broadened perspectives. You want to develop those interpersonal and social emotional skills. And lastly, you want to provide independent learning supports accessible for all, not just few. And that's that UDL lens, right? So if you're providing preloading for one student, make it accessible for all, make it an instructional video, have some tasks that students can do by themselves before they bring it into the collaborative environment. Allow kids to form their own independent conception before broadening that conception to learning from and with their peers. So we had our desired outcomes, right? We had participants will know why, how, and when they can embed building thinking classrooms, collaborative learning, in a self-paced learning environment. Well, why? Why is the value of collaboration, right, in broadening perspectives in comparison to self-paced learning where there's more independent critical thought? How? How do we do it? At upright, vertical, at vertical non-permanent surfaces, kids are collaborating together. That is the best way. If you have kids still collaborating around a desk and they're looking down at each other, it's really hard for communication purposes for a student to see how somebody else is thinking when they only can see the 180 degrees of their work. Have kids work at upright, vertical, non-permanent surfaces. And when? The beginning of class. Collaboration should happen at the beginning of the class. Think about it. When kids come in, we're getting settled, you want to kind of transition from, my kids are going to be coming from lunch into learning. So that transition of coming into class, that's the first time that they are together. Allow them to be like a tree. Let the collaboration serve as the trunk, and then they branch out into self-pacing where kids are going to be at different lessons. Start class with some sort of collaborative opportunities for kids to learn from and with each other. Questions? We have a lot of time for questions, actually. This is 12:46. I was hoping to be done by 12:50, so we did it, Tony Rose.
Yes, I told you were gonna crush it. We do have a couple of questions, and I think hopefully we'll get to all of them. One of them says, "How do we deal with students or groups simply waiting to copy off a group close by?"
Oh my goodness. Okay, can I take people on a journey around my classroom? Okay, first off, I had kids come in. So this is before lunch. Kids came in, they put up the homework problems up on the board. We're doing a gallery walk at the beginning of class. We're going to be talking about what we did. But we have a poster in my class for values right there. And the values say, first one is no mistake shaming. Second one, understanding is greater than completion. Third one is equity of voice. And fourth one is that questions are greater than answers. The second one there talks about understanding is greater than completion. If your students are focused on completion, they will absolutely copy. If you're grading this assignment that they're working collaboratively, yes, they will copy. I don't grade work based on completion. And my students know when they're working together that it's more important for everybody to understand than to complete the problem. It's not about the speed in which how fast we can get the problem done. It's do we all understand? So to simply respond to that question, you need to establish a culture in your classroom that states upfront that understanding is more important than completion.
Mm. I love that so much. I love that so much. And it's a shift, right? Like it's a shift on teacher mindset, it's a shift on student mindset. And so, and it'll take some time to also shift those mindsets. So give yourself a lot of grace, give yourself a lot of patience as well as you shift into this culture of learning and not necessarily grading, right?
Yeah.
Beautiful. Okay. Does having a lot of multilinguals affect anything about the visibly random groupings?
Actually, it's it's a better strategy for multilingual learners, because think about it, you're providing multiple modes of representation. Students are talking as well as doing the work where there's a visible reference. I have taught in schools where I've had Micronesian students that we don't even have language translators on Google for Chuukese or Marshallese, so I couldn't even provide supports in their own language to them. But because we were using a vertical non-permanent surface and they were able to talk with each other, it creates a more ease in communication for our multilingual English language learners.
Yes, I completely agree with that too. We want to get our students talking, right? Like the more they talk, the better. And y'all, students really are really, what do I want to say? Like super helpful when you create that space too of being able to communicate in different ways, if not the language, if not the spoken language, but definitely provide that space for students to be able to collaborate and use the language. So speak, speak, speak is like the best thing. Yes, Joe.
And so, sorry, also, when they're working at these vertical non-permanent surfaces, you want to say whoever has the marker cannot write down anything of their own thought. So it's requiring you're going to create this forced discourse where the only way the problem gets completed is through the people communicating to the person with the marker. That's another really important thing to think about. So Tony Rose, thanks for sparking that thought with, yeah, we want to create discourse. How do we create it? Well, you can't write anything down unless we're talking.
There you go. I love that, right? And again, kind of honing in on what Joe was saying earlier is that collaboration cannot happen accidentally. You really have to plan this out in a way that every single student is engaging
Mhm.
intentionally and meaningfully, right? And so keep that in mind when you're creating these spaces for students to speak, for students to communicate, and you may have to model that multiple times so that students understand what that process looks like. We don't want to assume that our students know how to do it because every educator that they've gone through has a different way of doing it. And so, Joe, another question: what do you do when a student is when there's a behavior issue and causes a lot of distractions?
Good question. And I mean, you want to get to the root cause of the behavior. We know that various students have various things going on outside of school that can affect their behavior in school. What I will say is that one of the greatest behavior management tools is engagement. So thinking about how are you creating a greater engaging environment where there is no busy work. Like I was, oh my gosh, I was not a good student in the typical brick and mortar. I was off the wall. I could not stop talking. Like I went to Catholic school for 1 year and I got 50 demerits. I kid you not. So I get when kids are disruptive and misbehave in traditional classrooms. What I will say is this will decrease that. Why? Because kids are standing up, working together, and talking things out. Sometimes kids just want to act up because they want attention. Well, they're going to get the attention when they're working with each other, talking with each other up at whiteboards. Now, if a kid is deliberately like acting up against the environment, that's where relationships come into play. If a kid doesn't like you, it's they're not going to buy into the system even if they know the system works. If they don't like you as the teacher, they might try to ruin it. So it's about building those relationships with those students. It's trying to meet them where they're at, but then also understanding their experience and creating an engaging experience for them. Nobody wants to sit down. I'm sorry to the people in the audience right now. You guys have been watching me through your laptop or phone or something for the past 60 minutes. Like this is torturous for me. If I was attending this webinar, I would need to like if my screen was shown, I would turn my camera off. I would need to be walking around to listen to it. I would need to be yeah. This would be a hard experience for me to engage in. So yeah, allow way for kids to walk around the room, provide different modalities within the classroom. Understand that nobody wants to stay in the same space for 60 minutes.
Yes, and a reminder too that y'all, these are kids. Even though they're
Yeah.
like 16, 17, 18, they're still kids. So behavior is going to be expected, right? Whatever challenging behavior that is, because again, we don't know they're bringing into our classrooms. So again, continuing to give grace, continuing to get to know your students so you know when something is off and you can go ahead and have some preventive measures, or at least checking in right away to make sure the students are okay, right? And so
Mhm.
that's something that I really just want to hone in on. I taught middle school and behavior was off the chain and I loved it. And so just keep in mind, it's just part of growing up. I mean, even as adults, right? We have some questionable behaviors when we have professional development. So keep thinking about different ways to engage as well as making our content relatable as well, right?
Mhm.
Okay. So Joe, do you spend time thinking of grouping for collaboration? Or are you totally using random grouping for the TCR?
No. So, sorry. I am not only using building thinking classrooms. So I have learning communities where I have pods of students that will work together. It's almost like a study group, but in class that is intentionally structured. So it's student-led heterogeneous learning communities where it's intentionally heterogeneous for the purpose of creating that diversity, those conversations around diversity of thought. So visibly random groups, remember, like if you're randomly grouping kids, you don't know, you might be putting groups of kids together that are both on the same pace and accelerating, and they're not even asking questions to each other, they're just like doing the work. The way that I ensure that students are working with uh, some students that are behind, that are behind the pace, or some students that are ahead of the pace, is I intentionally collaborate those heterogeneous groupings, and it's built around empathy. We stop thinking about speed as being good and bad at math. We understand that sometimes the students who are slower are really just deeper thinkers that need to know why, how, and what before they can even get started. So we don't think about ability as whoever gets done first, or it's not a race. It's about understanding, and there's value for both of those individuals, the students that are working at a slower pace and the faster pace, to be working collaboratively together. So just like how I said, building thinking classrooms is like once every other day, once every 3 days at most. Same thing with learning communities. That's the other thing that I'll do for collaboration at the beginning of class.
Beautiful. I also saw in the comment, one of our participants is saying, I'm standing and moving around, which, rightfully so. And I kind of just chuckled to Joe when you were saying just about how, you were kind of all over the place in school. And so I know for me was definitely my neurodivergence. And so keeping in mind that like building thinking classrooms as well as self-pacing is really, really, really powerful actually for our babies who are neurodivergent because they can
Mhm.
make those moves, they can pause, they can take a break, they can do all the things that they need to do to take care of themselves, and they're not losing any content. So, Joe, we have 4 minutes. So, can we do lightning rounds of questions? Because we have 7
Go.
questions. You ready? All right,
Hammer time.
cool.
Go.
How in depth or large are the mastery checks?
Mine are 5 questions long, shouldn't last more than 10 minutes.
Beautiful. Do you teach skills and concepts during your flipped videos? And I'm assuming it's just in your instructional videos. Do you teach skills and concepts?
I heavily focus on conceptual over procedural. I don't want kids to mimic, right? That's one of the big things with building thinking classrooms, is we don't want kids to copy the exact same ways we do things. So I try to provide the big ideas. It's kind of like, um, think of the kid as the GPS, and you're just going to give them the address where to go to. Try to say like, hey, you're going to go in this direction, but don't give them the exact roads to get there. Let them build that
Mm.
GPS out.
I love that so much. We definitely need more of that type of thinking as opposed to just copy and paste what I do, right? Love. What is your process to developing thinking tasks?
Thinking tasks. I will regurgitate the tasks that are provided on nmath.org. Enrich. .org. UCubed has great thinking tasks. I'll create thin slicing from my curriculum. I'll dissect my curriculum and turn one task into 5 with slightly enhancing numbers from single digit to double digit. If we're working with rational numbers, boom, we introduce a decimal, then we introduce a fraction. You kind of increase that complexity from just single tasks that are provided in the curriculum. Oh, Justin Lai also mentioned in the chat that generative AI is a great way to do so. He is an AI expert. So please listen to or read the stuff that he has put about AI. He's very much on the forefront of that.
Yes, beautiful, and funny enough, because Justin's question is next. How has student feedback been in terms of any observations from students saying how it's really different from what they are used to?
A lot. I will have students tell me, like, wonder, like, wait, are you not up at the board at the beginning of class? I'm like, no, you're doing the work. You're talking about the work. It's a much more active environment. The other thing, so sorry, for current students, there's a lot of curiosity, and then they realize, wow, this is not like a ride I'm going on. This is like a ride I'm contributing to. Um, and for kids that I used to have, a lot of kids will talk about like that the videos are helpful because not only are kids able to get initial introduction to a concept that way, but they can also revisit the videos after doing tasks. So it supports their consolidation. I also am able to build really strong relationships with students because I spend a lot of time connecting with them, talking about their work, talking about how they're doing. So those are typical feedback that I get from students. Sorry, one thing I want to say is let your students tell your story. Oh my gosh, if you're going to do anything different in the classroom, if you're going to do anything that you think is worthwhile, let your students tell your story. The only reason why I'm allowed to do what I do is because my students' results and just general like happiness. I have students that are learning and they're happy to be learning. And when schools see that, they'll let you do it. That's if students are learning and happy, you can do both.
Yeah, and that's such a great thing too. We had a couple more questions, but y'all, it's already on the hour. So if you need to go, please go. I do want to address one last question about students arriving daily from Sudan and South America who are not yet verbal. So how do you get them to talk when they can't? Joe, if I can answer this, that would be great.
Yes,
I would
please.
just say, y'all, there are different ways to communicate than actual talking, right? So in my head, what I'm thinking about is maybe potentially getting them to write something, maybe potentially getting them to watch something before they can even start speaking. Sentence starters are also really powerful in this case. You can also put them and partner them up with students who are already English speakers, or even just in a group with them, and then could continue using AI as well to translate any question, anything that you need to do. But that's what I'm thinking about is really honestly just doing sentence stems and just other ways so that it's not verbally talking, right? There are other ways to do that. Joe, did you want to add on?
I'm actually not an expert in like supporting student in like learning language. I can have kids learn with language barriers, but if we're talking about trying to get them to start talking, I'm not an expert in that field. So I'm glad you took over on that.
Yeah. Yeah. So just, there are different ways also. I know that language barriers can be really scary, and also know that these kids are also just kids, right? They want to be heard, maybe not in a way that it's English and something that you can understand, but there's a way to be able to connect with them so that you can better assist them and support them. And so, y'all, we're over time. Thank you all. I know that there were a couple of other questions, but just, keep y'all reach out to Joe, slide in his DMs. Like he loves, loves, loves having conversations about all of this. So definitely take advantage of that. We love when we can continue having conversations as well. And so, with that being said, y'all, please follow us on social media as well, Modern Classroom. If you join our Facebook group, we actually have about 20,000 students, or not students, but members on there that will share all of the things with you if you have any questions. Whew, with that being said, y'all, thank you, thank you, thank you so much for attending. This was so much fun. Joe, I love being in the same space as you. Thank you, thank you, thank
It's
you, thank you,
mutual,
thank
Tony
you, thank
Rose.
you. All right, y'all. Take care of yourself. Go do something on Friday the 13th, whatever that may be for you. Bye,
Bye, everyone.
everyone.